Okay, so my name is Siavash Mahdavi. It's a pleasure to be here. It's actually really great to be able to see so many people interested in the cause. So looking at modern day slavery, and then looking at how technology can actually be applied to this cause to kind of better it, to be able to kind of help in rehabilitation, help in prevention, in tracking what's actually going on in this cause. I myself, rewind a few years ago, I didn't really know much about this myself either, right? My only experience with trafficking as such was from watching the movie Taken. And as far as I was concerned, Liam Neeson, clearly presented a clear set of skills, and the baddies all died, and we all got back to business, right? So this is kind of really what I thought. Going into it deeper, I realized that was just the tip of the iceberg. In fact, there's a lot more going on than this. So what I'm going to present to you today is looking at the global picture of modern-day slavery, looking at trafficking. I'm going to focus on India as a case study, and then go into what we're doing at 3D in India specifically, and in the 3D printing applications in the rehabilitation of girls that have been rescued from sex trafficking. So, we've seen slavery from movies around, looking at America from 200 years back, and you'd see the guys on the platforms and the slave owners bidding for slaves. And if you kind of account for inflation, the average slave would have effectively been about $40,000 to buy. So maybe a little more expensive than you would have imagined. So it was real money at the time. Looking at it now, so the average price of a slave today is about $90. So this isn't $90 per hour or per month. This is $90 and you get to keep them. That's it. It's an all-out purchase. This is largely due to population increase as well. So if you look at a graph of populations going up, you literally see price of people going down. And this is an average. The people you can buy people in parts of Bangladesh and India for $20 or $30 as well. So it actually goes a lot lower than this as well. So let's look deeper into the problem. So statistics always change. So here we're saying 35 million people. The numbers are going up and down. It's actually very difficult to track, but it's in the tens of millions of people are globally trafficked right now. 14 million of them are in India. So India is a specific hotspot for this challenge. And of them, as you can imagine, there's a good chunk that are adolescents and kids. Across international trafficking, so people moving from one region to another, every year 600 to 800,000 people are moved across borders. And again, they're predominantly women and children as well. 76% in India are women that get trafficked as well. And if you look at the missing persons list, so the official list, there are about 200,000 people that are missing. And even in the boundary between January and September, you can see another 73,000 were added to the missing persons list. Now, what you'll notice is that the official number of missing people is much smaller than the 14 million who are actually working within modern-day slavery and trafficking. So let's focus from modern-day slavery as a whole. We're now moving into India and into sex trafficking as one of the primary types of modern-day slavery and trafficking. It starts in a brothel. So the girl has been taken from her home from age 10 onwards, so usually kind of early teens, and they get taken into a brothel. What happens from there, if you can, you rescue the girls, they go into a shelter. Now, what you think happens next is they go back to their families. This isn't what happens. Two reasons. Firstly, if they were actually taken from their families and went through what happens within a brothel, their families and their communities tend not to accept them, and they get kicked out. Unfortunately, that's actually not the bigger picture. What tends to happen is a lot of the families in rural areas where people have low education sell their children to traffickers. So what actually ends up happening is if you give them to your families, the families say, great, I can sell her again. The girl gets sold twice. So it's very rare in our experience of working with shelters and safe houses that there is reintegration back to the family. Obviously, if there is, that's great, and there's always an opportunity to look at that, but in reality, that doesn't tend to happen. So education. So 70% of people trafficked, of the girls trafficked within India are illiterate. So that means no reading, no writing, nothing. So you can clearly see a correlation between lack of education and the propensity to being trafficked. 40% of the girls that get rescued get re-trafficked, right? It's a big number. Now this happens for a couple of reasons. So this means a girl has been rescued physically from a brothel, get taken to a safe house. 40% of them are literally re-trafficked again. So sometimes that's a fraudulent uncle that pretends he's found his long-lost niece and usually bribes someone along the way to take the girls back. But often it's actually lack of other opportunities for the girls and lack of education. So looking at these stats, you can see on the left-hand side, short-term accommodation and rehabilitation is actually very rare. So the girls get rescued if they're above 18. They don't actually get that much help. They may get a few weeks to get themselves together, a pat on the back and say, off you go, you're good now. Right? And these are girls that are illiterate. They don't know what else to do. So often they just say, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no other opportunities. I'm just going to let you walk back into the brothel door. Longer term help is even more rare as well. So that rarely happens. So looking at the solution on how to address this, the very first thing you want to do is just prevent it. If you prevent this whole thing, then we're all good to go. Nothing's happening. Of course, that's wishful thinking. What else you need to do is prosecution, right? So now we're looking at the traffickers, looking at people running the brothels, educating judges and the judiciary, looking at educating the police, who often actually look at the girl being trafficked as the criminal and not the person who's running the brothels, right? Looking at rescue, so actually physically taking the girls out of the brothels, and then finally rehabilitation. So this is everything from teaching them how to look after themselves, health, writing skills, general mathematics, looking after finances, just understanding how to gain some sort of skills. So leading on to my background, so this strange photo here is what I was up to a few years back. So my own background is actually quite technical. I did a master's in artificial intelligence at UCL, then went on to do a PhD in robotics. And there I used 3D printing extensively to work within a range of industries. So started my first company in 2008, and we worked within aerospace. We created lightweight, very complex products, as you can see here. We worked in the medical industry. We worked in designing customized orthopedic implants that you could actually print in titanium and put inside you, in automotive, in customization, even in jewelry. So I was well aware of all the great applications that 3D printing could bring. And we thought, when it comes to the rehabilitation, when it comes to the alternatives to being re-trafficked, is there a way that we can educate the girls and train them on how to use 3D printing, right? So 3D printing can be as small as a desktop type machine. It looks much the size of a microwave, but it's highly valued. So people don't know how to use the technology, and yet it has many applications. So is there a way we can take girls, teach them skills that can allow them to move into a range of industries and actually get employed? So we looked to go do what was called a proof of concept, to go out, meet several safe houses and shelters in India with my colleague Catherine, and worked with a range of girls. We actually literally took a 3D printer under our shoulders. We turned up, we sat down with some laptops we brought with us, and we started to show the girls what we can do with 3D printing. And we were very curious. We didn't know if they would be thinking, what on earth are you trying to teach me? I've just been pulled out of this really traumatic experience. You want me to sit down in front of a laptop and start designing something in 3D, or whether they'd really welcome it. So where we sit at 3D now is we're currently focusing on the rehabilitation side, right? So we're working, most of the girls that work with us are actually, they've gone through trafficking, though there's some that are potentially viable to being trafficked. So we work with them as well. What we want to be able to do is actually expand and move to prevention. So move to the source locations within India where the girls get trafficked from, educate the girls and their parents that their girls can actually do something else. That instead of essentially selling your kids on to a trafficker, here's an entire career that she can have, and actually she can be more useful potentially doing that. So the workflow we're now imagining is you start with a brothel, the girls get rescued, they go into the shelter. Now, what we don't want them to do is go back to the brothel. So they come to us at 3D, we teach them 3D printing. Now, there are many applications for this. It's not as technical as you think. You actually end up learning a lot of skills like general mathematics without having to formally learn maths. So if I want to print a piece of jewelry in a 3D printer, if I can understand, okay, I can print 5 in this direction and 6 in this direction, I can print 30. You're essentially doing multiplication without realizing you're doing that. So you're actually learning some general skills. So we're trying to find ways for them to get employment, either within the academy environment that we work in, or actually with partners that we're working with in India. So this could range from a range of different jobs. So there's a medical application, so customized orthopedics, so that's quite technical. You could go into aerospace, automotive, as I said, so maybe more around customization. And then we have kind of graphic design, so maybe a little bit more creative. And then architecture. So these are all applications for 3D printing. Now, what we're focusing on right now is actually fashion and jewelry, right? This is because we've actually seen commercial viability for the machines we have access to do something called lost wax casting, where you can essentially 3D print jewelry. And we have some great applications and examples just around the corner there for everyone to see what we can actually achieve with the 3D printer. You can essentially print in gold and silver by lost wax casting out of a simpler material. And the girls really seem to like it. So what I'm going to show you now is a short video of our trip. It's only 20 seconds of our trip in India to show you what we did with the girls. And the girls we found, I remember the first day we went there, I said, okay, so double click on the icon, open the app, and then open up a file. And that just didn't mean anything to them. They picked up the mouse and they were just looking at what the mouse is. So that's the level we're starting at. And what you'll see in the video is literally 3 days later, where one of the girls you'll see is teaching the other ones about the design rules of 3D printing. So really complex stuff. So, what are the aspect ratios, or what are the thicknesses that you can actually achieve with 3D printing? And then they take a USB stick, they design something, they express their creativity, they go to a 3D printer, run it, and print their own parts. So here's a short video.
नीचे ये ना मेरे से तो समझ में आया कमल आपके चलाया 45 हाँ सेम उसी तरीके से है सर चलो हाँ बहुत बढ़िया बने वो एक साथ.
So that's an overview of what we did. We're actually going back there in a few weeks to look at a more permanent center, looking to do a longer term curriculum. So this is only 3 days, literally from 0 to that point took 3 days. Now we're looking to do a 3 or 6 month program where we can then kind of really take the girls and find them gainful employment. So here you can see the 4 different kind of stages of trying to find a solution for trafficking. And luckily we have a great panel for you today that actually spans the whole thing. So you can see at 3D, we're focusing on prevention and rehabilitation, but the other great panelists you have essentially cover everything else. So it should be a really great panel for you today. Just to finish off, I'm sure the panelists would love to get your direct kind of input and maybe collaboration. But even outside of that, there are things that all of us can do. And it's obviously beyond sex trafficking, but just modern day slavery in general. And there's a great website you can go to where it says how many slaves work for you. And you can essentially fill in information. You say, I'm 25, I live in London, I have a 2-bedroom house, I eat beef, I have grains, I drive a car in this way, and it literally breaks down your own personal impact on this industry. So it'll be very interesting and educational for everyone. So that's my overview. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. We have another keynote coming up, and then we move on to the panelists. So thank you very much.